dimly lit cantina on Artok Prime was a cesspool of the galaxy's most notorious mercenaries, bounty hunters, and assorted scum. Amid the cacophony of raucous laughter and clinking glasses, a grizzled veteran known as Kraxus nursed his acidic beverage, his chitinous exoskeleton bearing the scars of countless battles. Beside him, a fresh-faced warrior named Kylak still gleamed like polished obsidian, his claws razor-sharp and untested. "You must be joking, Kraxus," he scoffed. "Terran males? Brave? They're nothing but soft, fleshy weaklings." A deep, guttural chuckle erupted from the shadowy corner where a spiky nightmare of a being lurked. "The pup speaks true," the monstrosity rumbled. "Terrans are insignificant gnats, easily crushed." Kraxus fixed them both with a steely glare. "I was once as ignorant as you whelps," he growled, "until I witnessed the unfathomable courage of the Terran warriors firsthand. Their bravery is unmatched in this cosmos." The entire cantina fell silent, dozens of menacing visages swiveling towards the grizzled veteran. Even the most hardened killers treated Kraxus's words with reverence. Kylak gulped audibly. "But the reports clearly state they're physically and psychologically unremarkable." "Aye, that was my impression as well." Kraxus nodded, taking a swig of his drink. "Until a mere cycle ago, when a wealthy Terran male hired me as his bodyguard." A curious murmur rippled through the crowd as the mercenaries leaned in closer, their interest piqued. "He arrived claiming he'd heard this planet harbored the most formidable mercenary warriors in the galaxy," Kraxus continued. "I assumed he sought protection, as all weak species inevitably do, but his request left me speechless." He paused for dramatic effect as the cantina held its collective breath. The Terran asked where he could find the finest brothel. Pandemonium erupted as raucous laughter and incredulous shouts filled the air. Kylak and the spiky horror exchanged disbelieving looks. "You expect us to believe you escorted that pathetic sack of flesh to a pleasure den?" the insectoid heckler demanded with a dismissive click of his mandibles. "And lived to drink about it?" Kraxus slammed his glass down, silencing the rabble. "I speak the truth, worm, sworn on my warrior's honor. That bold Terran sought the most dangerous females in this sector to rut with, for pleasure." A hushed terror descended over the cantina as mercenaries clutched their sidearms instinctively. To willingly approach the lethal seductresses of the pleasure dens was tantamount to suicide. "He doubled my exorbitant fee without hesitation," Kraxus said, his voice lowering to a growl. 7 trillion credits transferred instantly. He could have hired the entire Kizar swarm for that amount." The spiky horror gaped in disbelief. Where did this Terran acquire such immense wealth? From some mystical human courtship ritual involving flowers and a substance called chocolate? Kraxus explained, making quotation gestures with his claws. "Apparently, it has the power to enrapture and subdue even the deadliest of females." The gathered mercenaries erupted in raucous laughter and jeering once more. Kraxus weathered the storm, his expression grave. "I speak true, you ignorant savages," he bellowed. "I beheld it with my own eyes. That brazen Terran seduced the most lethal beauties, one after the next, leaving a trail of claw marks and tattered flesh in his wake." The laughter died in their throats as the mercenaries studied the scars crisscrossing Kraxus's exoskeleton anew, their faces ashen. He emerged from each den, beaten and bloodied, yet grinning like a madman. Kraxus continued softly, boasting of some primal romance ritual involving celestial bodies and atmospheric conditions. Kylak swallowed hard. "You mean to tell us Terran males aren't afraid of their females?" "Oh no, they fear them as we all rightly should," Kraxus corrected him. "But through the mystical powers of chocolate and flowers, they've mastered the art of sating that fearsome rage, over and over, until death by natural causes." A stunned silence hung over the cantina until the spiky horror finally found its voice. "Impossible. No male could survive such repeated onslaught. See for yourself, unbeliever," a familiar voice rang out. Every head swiveled towards the cantina entrance. There stood the Terran male, flanked by 2 stunningly beautiful alien females. One clung to his arm, gazing at him adoringly, while the other looked around nervously, her claws flexing. In a heartbeat, mercenaries scrambled for their gas masks and weapons, readying themselves to repel the deadly sirens. But the Terran held up a placating hand. "Easy, easy. I'm just here to see my friend Kraxus," he said with a disarming grin. "No need for theatrics, ladies." Kraxus rose, his movements guarded. "Our business is concluded, Terran. I want no part of your suicidal dalliances." The Terran's smile didn't waver. "Come now, Kraxus. You were the only male on this rock with the quad to even speak to a female, let alone escort one as stunning as this." He nodded towards the clinging beauty. The others soiled themselves just looking at her. Murmurs of embarrassed agreement rippled through the cantina as the mercenaries slowly lowered their weapons. "I'm not here to hire you," the Terran continued, "just to make you an offer, one warrior to another." Kraxus eyed him warily. "I'm listening." The Terran glanced around the cantina, his expression turning solemn. "What I witnessed here horrified me. An entire species teetering on the brink, cowed and emasculated by their own females." His gaze fell on Kylak, still gripping his sidearm with trembling claws. "If it wasn't for their predatory nature, you'd have gone extinct long ago. And all because you let them consume you, mind, body, and soul." The mercenaries shifted uncomfortably, unable to refute his words. "On my world, the females are just as fearsome," the Terran said. "Maybe even more so. But we males have spent millennia mastering the sublime art of romance. Through the magic of flowers, chocolates, starlight, and other subtle enchantments, we've learned to beguile and placate even the deadliest of rages." He stepped forward, emboldened by their rapt attention. "I can teach you this ancient power. I can be your wingman, if you allow it. With my guidance, you'd never need to fear your females again. You could rut with them at will, leaving as battle-scarred heroes rather than mangled husks." The Terran's gaze settled on the nervous, claw-flexing beauty beside him. "This is Haziah," he said softly, "and she thinks you're awesome, Kraxus." A heavy silence hung in the cantina as Kraxus studied the Terran and his alien companions. Haziah gazed up at the grizzled veteran with naked longing in her eyes, claws flexing invitingly. Kraxus felt his carapace prickle with an instinctive mix of desire and dread. To willingly approach such a lethal female courted a grisly demise. Yet the Terran's words rang with the undeniable truth. He had survived conquering these very sirens, night after night. "How?" The gravelly utterance slipped from Kraxus's mouth before he could stop it. "How is this possible?" The Terran's smile stretched wider, recognizing the spark of desperate hope smoldering in the mercenary's eyes. "The ways of the Terran wingman are ancient and profound," he said, spreading his arms magnanimously. "But I'd be honored to initiate one as battle-hardened as yourself into the mystic arts of seduction." Raucous guffaws erupted from the surrounding mercenaries, their bravado resurgent now that no immediate threat appeared to exist. "You're going to teach this dried husk to seduce females?" The insectoid heckler clicked his mandibles derisively. "He'd be gutted and hollowed out before the first pickup line." A chorus of jeering laughter followed, but the Terran's gaze remained locked on Kraxus. "What do you say, my friend?" he asked, voice lowered to a confidential murmur. "Are you warrior enough to undertake this path? I can show you pleasures to make the most harrowing battles feel tame by comparison." Kraxus felt his pulse thundering in his hearing cavities. He'd witnessed the Terran's conquest firsthand, left awestruck by the male's stamina and prowess. Could this mythical wingman power truly be attained? Or was it merely a suicidal dream? Only one way to find out. "Very well, Terran," Kraxus rumbled, silencing the mocking laughter around them. "Initiate me into your mystic arts. I have nothing to lose but my honor at this point." The Terran's face split into a triumphant grin as he clapped Kraxus firmly on the shoulder. "Then prepare yourself, my friend, for you're about to embark on the greatest adventure of seduction this galaxy has ever witnessed." Riotous laughter exploded anew from the surrounding mercenaries. But Kraxus didn't care. His mind was already racing, imagining the depraved ecstasies that might await, if he could only unlock the secrets of the Terran wingman. "First, we'll need to acquire the proper accoutrements," the Terran said, rubbing his hands together excitedly. "The key to subduing any female's rage lies in showering her with gifts. Luckily, I've brought an ample supply." He whistled sharply, and a hovering cargo drone drifted in from the street, stacked high with an assortment of packages. The Terran deftly caught one and thrust it into Kraxus's hands. "Open it!" Kraxus eyed the unassuming container skeptically. before shredding it open with a flick of his claws. A dozen long-stemmed flowers tumbled out, their vibrant petals seeming to shimmer with an inner luminescence. "Behold, the mighty rose," the Terran crowed, scooping one up with almost religious reverence. "On my world, no seduction is complete without these floral ambassadors of desire," Kraxus snorted derisively. "You expect me to present plants to a female? She'd devour me on principle." "Ah, but these are no mere plants," the Terran chided, waving the rose's stem enticingly under Kraxus's olfactory receptors. "Inhale their essence and be enlightened." Skeptical but intrigued, Kraxus leaned in and drew a tentative breath. The floral aroma was heady and intoxicating, hinting at musky undercurrents of exotic spices and sun-warmed earth. "You see?" The Terran grinned knowingly as Kraxus blinked in surprise. "This transcendent bouquet is foreplay for a female's senses. It sets her instincts aquiver in anticipation of greater tactile delights to come." The grizzled mercenary found himself turning the rose over in his claws, studying its velvety folds with new appreciation. If mere fragrance could provoke such profound stirrings within his battle-hardened psyche, what raptures might the complete wingman ritual unlock? "Next, we require the other key ingredient." The Terran was already rooting through another package, finally producing an ornate box with a flourish. "Chocolate, the ambrosia of seduction." He pried the lid open to reveal a dozen gleaming orbs nestled in sumptuous crimson fabric. Each one seemed to glow with an inner smolder, whispering of decadent pleasures to come. "You're going to placate a female with food?" The very notion struck Kraxus as ludicrous, but he couldn't tear his eyes away from the chocolate's dark, beckoning curves. "Not just any food." The Terran scooped one up almost reverently. "This is the distillation of every wanton ecstasy your species has ever dreamed. The purest essence of carnal delight, rendered in semi-solid form." Haziah made a soft, keening sound in the back of her throat. Her eyes locked hungrily on the confection. The Terran grinned and offered it to her. She snatched it from his fingers and devoured it in 2 dainty bites, her eyes fluttering closed as she savored the molten rapture. "You see," he asked Kraxus meaningfully, "the path to a female's soul lies in stimulating her every sense. Flowers to inflame her desire, chocolate to sate her darkest cravings. Combine them with the proper ambience and atmosphere, and she becomes malleable as warm wax in your hands." Kraxus stared in mute disbelief as Haziah pressed herself shamelessly against the Terran, nuzzling his neck with undisguised want. The mercenaries surrounding them had fallen into an awed hush, their earlier mocking forgotten. "So, you're saying with these talismans, I could safely approach and rut with her?" Kraxus gestured weakly towards Haziah, unable to tear his eyes away. "I'm saying you could have her screaming your name to the heavens, my friend." The Terran clapped him firmly on the shoulder once more, his grin widening. "And she'll be back for more before your refractory cycle resets. That's the power of the Terran wingman ritual." Kraxus felt his primary hearts thundering in his chest, an almost giddy sense of delirious possibility threatening to overwhelm him. Could this soft, unassuming alien male truly be the harbinger of such sublime pleasures? Or was it all an elaborate delusion designed to lure him to an agonizing demise? Only one way to find out. "Very well, Terran," he growled, clutching the rose and chocolates to his carapace. "Initiate me fully into your wingman ways. No matter how depraved or perilous, I will withstand it all to unlock this power you speak of." The Terran's grin was blinding. "Then brace yourself, my friend, for you're about to experience pleasures to shatter 1,000 galaxies." With a whoop of delirious glee, he seized Kraxus by the forearm and hustled him towards the cantina's exit, Haziah trailing behind with undisguised hunger in her eyes. The mercenaries watched in stunned silence as the trio departed, wondering just what manner of madness was about to unfold. But deep in their primordial cores, each felt a tremor of desperate, forbidden longing. For if the Terrans spoke truly, if the path to conquering their females could indeed be unlocked, then even the deadliest of warriors might embrace a chance at rebirth as victorious studs, rather than live out their cycles as cringing eunuchs. The seedy back alleys of Artok Prime's pleasure district seemed to reverberate with an almost palpable sense of debauchery. Lurid neon signage and holographic come-ons beckoned from every doorway, each one promising uninhibited delights behind closed doors. Kraxus felt his carapace prickling with equal measures of desire and dread as the Terran led him and Haziah deeper into this neon-tinged labyrinth. The sultry alien female clung to the male's arm, her movements almost feline with anticipation. "So, this is where you plied your wingman arts?" Kraxus asked, unable to disguise the tremor in his voice. "Amidst these dens of iniquity?" "But of course," the Terran flashed him a roguish grin over his shoulder. "Where better to hone the mystic rituals of seduction than the very crucibles of carnal rapture?" He came to an abrupt halt before an unmarked doorway, the bioluminescent stains streaking the entrance, hinting at untold perversions within. Kraxus eyed it apprehensively, his claws flexing in a useless warding gesture. "Ah, the celestial boudoir," the Terran sighed wistfully, as though recalling fond memories. "This is where it all began for me, the place I was first initiated into the ancient pleasureways." Haziah made a soft, mewling sound, pressing herself shamelessly against the male's side. He grinned and stroked her cheek in a fond gesture. "Patience, my dusky jewel. All good things to those who wait, yes?" The female subsided with visible effort, her eyes smoldering with naked hunger. Kraxus swallowed hard, part of him wondering if he shouldn't just turn and flee before this madness went any further. But the Terran was already wrapping firmly on the unmarked portal in a precise sequence. A narrow slit irised open, revealing a pair of slitted crimson eyes burning from the shadows within. "Ah, the wingman returns!" A sultry, almost purring voice slid like honey from the slit. "And I see he brings fresh initiates." Those crimson eyes settled speculatively on Kraxus, flaying away his psychological defenses with surgical precision. The mercenary fought the urge to turn and bolt, feeling stripped utterly bare beneath that smoldering gaze. "Indeed, my dusky lotus." The Terran sketched an elegant bow, his voice warm with familiarity. "My latest student seeks to partake of your transcendent tutelage. If you would be so gracious as to admit us." The slitted crimson eyes studied Kraxus a moment longer before the portal irised open with a pneumatic hiss. A shadowed figure resolved itself in the beckoning darkness beyond, all lush, undulating curves and faintly bioluminescent tendrils drifting like a sentient aura. "Enter and be enlightened, awe child," the purring voice intoned. "The path to ultimate rapture awaits." Kraxus froze, every combat instinct screaming at him to withdraw, to turn and flee this place of insidious temptation before it consumed him utterly. But the Terran was already striding through the portal with Haziah in tow, shooting Kraxus an encouraging wink over his shoulder. Drawing a fortifying breath, Kraxus clutched the flowers and chocolates to his carapace like talismans against evil and followed them into the darkness. The portal sealed shut behind him with a pneumatic hiss, plunging his world into Stygian gloom for a disorienting moment. Just as his senses began adjusting, lurid crimson lighting flared to life, casting everything in a fleshy, pulsating glow. They appeared to be standing in a circular antechamber, the walls adorned with abstract holograms of twining, undulating forms. Kraxus swallowed hard, suddenly feeling like an insignificant gnat who'd blundered into a Venus cult's mating chamber. "Welcome, initiate!" That sultry voice seemed to caress him from every angle. "To the first step on your path to sublime enlightenment." The shadowed figure resolved itself once more, gliding towards them with an unsettling, boneless fluidity. Kraxus instinctively shied back as she drew near, unable to tear his eyes away from the lush, undulating curves that seemed to devour the crimson light itself. "Do not fear, child," she crooned, drifting closer still. "I am Alora, High Priestess of the Celestial Boudoir, your guide into realms of transcendent rapture few males ever experience." One sinuous tendril drifted forth to caress Kraxus' cheek with feather-light intimacy. He flinched despite himself, feeling his carapace prickle with equal parts revulsion and forbidden desire. This was madness, utter, incomprehensible madness. Every combat-honed instinct shrieked at him to withdraw, to flee this place before its insidious temptations consumed him utterly. Yet some deeper, darker ember within burned with reckless curiosity, yearning to plumb the depraved mysteries hinted at here. Could the Terran's words truly hold such profane power? Or was this entire scenario merely an elaborate prelude to a hideous death? Only one way to find out. I am ready, Kraxus forced out in a strained rasp, to begin my initiation. Alora's crimson eyes seemed to blaze for a moment before crinkling in obvious approval. Yes, I can taste the desperation woven through your psyche, child. The aching need to experience raptures you've denied yourself for far too long. Another tendril drifted forth, materializing a crystal chalice that seemed to glow with its own inner smolder. She pressed it towards Kraxus's mandibles with ritualistic solemnity. Drink deep of the mother's divine ichor, she purred. Let it awaken your instincts and stir your desires into drooling wakefulness. Only then can you begin your true journey into the blissful abyss. Kraxus eyed the pulsating, vaguely opalescent liquid filling the chalice, feeling his stomach's roiling queasily. Some deep-rooted part of his psyche recoiled at the very notion of imbibing such a perverse substance, of surrendering himself to the depravities it portended. Yet hadn't he already crossed that line by following the Terran into this place? Better to see this madness through to its end, whatever that might be. Steeling himself, Kraxus grasped the proffered chalice and drained it in one defiant series of gulps, determined to withstand whatever profane alchemy it unleashed. For several beats, nothing happened. Then a slow, creeping warmth blossomed in his gut and spread like wildfire through his veins. Kraxus gasped as every nerve ending flared into searing wakefulness, his senses distorting into a kaleidoscope of lurid, pulsating hues. Somewhere through the hazy delirium, he saw Alora drifting closer, her lush curves seeming to swell and undulate with each heated pulse of his body. Kraxus tried to shy back but found himself rooted, utterly transfixed by the primal allure she radiated. Yes, she crooned, her voice seeming to stroke his psyche like a physical caress. Let the mother's rapture infuse your every cell. Let it awaken the raging stud you've suppressed for far too long. Kraxus moaned as fresh waves of molten desire lapped through his consciousness. He could feel his body responding in ways he'd long since denied, his instincts roaring back into snarling wakefulness. Dimly, he was aware of the Terran and Haziah watching from the shadows, their expressions inscrutable. This was madness, utter, unforgivable madness. He should withdraw, flee this place before its perverse temptations consumed him utterly. Yet that primal inferno blazing through his psyche yearned to be stoked higher, to plumb the depraved raptures promised here, no matter how depraved or soul-scarring. For was that not the entire purpose of the wingman ritual? To unlock sublime pleasures few males ever experienced and damn the consequences? Yes, Alora's sultry croon pulled him back into torrid focus. I can taste your desperation, child, your aching need to experience the ultimate raptures of the flesh. She drifted even closer, her bioluminescent tendrils seeming to caress and beckon in a mesmerizing dance of primal seduction. Kraxus felt his breath sawing in his chest, his instincts screaming for release. Submit to me, initiate, she breathed against his mandibles. Let me awaken your desires and prepare you for the journey ahead. Only then can you truly become the wingman. And with a shuddering moan of mingled dread and longing, Kraxus surrendered himself to her undulating embrace. Kraxus drifted in a hazy, languorous delirium, his senses utterly overwhelmed by the primal raptures Alora had unleashed. Vague memories flickered through his consciousness, of sinuous tendrils caressing his most sensitive nerve clusters, stoking his desires into snarling wakefulness, of lush, undulating curves enveloping him in fleshy ecstasy until he'd surrendered himself to shuddering release again and again. How much time had passed since he'd succumbed to the High Priestess's profane tutelage? Minutes? Hours? He had no way to gauge the passage of time in this pulsating crimson grotto. At last, Kraxus became aware of the Terran's voice piercing the lascivious miasma shrouding his mind. The male seemed to be speaking from a great distance, though the words were too indistinct to make out. With a monumental effort, Kraxus dragged himself back towards consciousness, blinking his eyes into focus. The Terran stood before him, features creased in a bemused smile as he regarded the grizzled mercenary. "Awake at last, my friend?" he asked, amusement tinging his voice. "I was beginning to think Alora had overwhelmed even your impressive stamina." Kraxus groaned, suddenly aware of the agonizing ache suffusing his entire body. His carapace felt scraped raw, scoring marks crisscrossing his flesh in a mute testament to the frenzy he'd surrendered himself to. "What? How long?" he rasped, trying to shake the clinging tendrils of delirium. "Only a few spans," the Terran assured him, with a dismissive wave. "Though I'll admit, you seem to embrace the priestess's tutelage with rather more enthusiasm than I anticipated." Memories came flooding back in a heated rush, of surrendering himself to Alora's undulating caresses, of reveling in raptures he'd long denied himself. Kraxus felt his carapace prickle with mingled shame and rekindled desire. "I succumbed to the madness," he rasped, struggling to reassemble his shredded dignity, "as any lesser male would." "Madness?" The Terran chuckled richly. "Oh no, my friend, what you experienced was merely the first tentative sip of what the wingman ritual can offer." He reached down, offering Kraxus a crystalline vial filled with a pulsating, opalescent liquid. The grizzled mercenary recoiled instinctively, his stomach's roiling at the sight of that perverse ichor. "You've awakened your primal desires and shed your psychological shackles," the Terran continued in a conspiratorial murmur. "Now it's time to transcend your physical limits and embrace your role as a true pleasure warrior." Kraxus eyed the vial with a mixture of revulsion and dark curiosity. "What depraved substance is that?" "A sacred alchemical draft known only to the highest initiates," the Terran replied with a roguish wink. "Imbibed, it will unlock physical capacities far beyond your species' feeble norms. Stamina, endurance, recovery time, all will be amplified to truly superhuman levels." He grinned salaciously. "You'll be able to rut without pause, sating even the hungriest of females again and again without rest. A sexual tyrannosaurus, if you will." Kraxus swallowed hard, feeling his primary hearts thundering in his chest. To surrender himself to such profane augmentation, to become a mere vessel for wanton indulgence. Yet hadn't he already crossed that line by submitting to Alora's rapturous embrace? Better to fully commit himself to this path, however depraved, and plumb its deepest mysteries. Steeling himself, Kraxus snatched the vial from the Terran's hand and drained it in one defiant series of gulps. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a slow, creeping tingle began emanating from his core, quickly blossoming into a conflagration that seemed to sear away every lingering ache and fatigue. Kraxus gasped as fresh vigor flooded his limbs, his body thrumming with a preternatural potency he'd never imagined possible. He flexed his claws in wonder, marveling at the rejuvenated strength and dexterity coursing through him. "Incredible," he rasped, awestruck. "A mere fraction of the delirious raptures yet to come," the Terran promised with a knowing grin. "If you're truly committed to mastering the wingman ritual." Kraxus met his gaze, feeling an almost euphoric sense of reckless determination take hold. He'd surrendered himself to the profane this far. Better to dive headlong into the abyss and plumb its darkest, most transcendent secrets. "I'm committed," he growled, claws flexing with newly amplified vigor. "Initiate me fully, no matter how depraved or soul-scarring it may be. I will withstand it all to unlock this power." The Terran's grin was blinding. "Then brace yourself, my friend, for the crucible of true enlightenment awaits." He clapped Kraxus firmly on the shoulder and gestured towards a shadowed archway, beyond which lurid crimson light pulsed in a hypnotic cadence. Kraxus could just make out the silhouettes of sinuous, undulating forms, writhing in a mesmerizing dance of primal seduction. "Alora's celestial harem awaits your initiation," the Terran murmured, his voice taking on a ritualistic solemnity. "There you will embrace the ultimate depravities of the wingman path and be reborn as a true pleasure warrior." Kraxus eyed the shadowed archway, feeling his newly amplified instincts stirring in a snarling frenzy of dark anticipation. Part of him recoiled at the profane madness beckoning from those crimson depths. Yet that primal inferno blazing through his psyche yearned to plumb the depraved mysteries promised within, damn the consequences. Drawing a fortifying breath, Kraxus squared his shoulders and strode forward without hesitation. Haziah fell in behind him, her eyes smoldering with naked hunger. The Terran followed last, that roguish grin never wavering. As they crossed the shadow's threshold, a wave of heated, musky incense rolled over them in an almost physical caress. Kraxus blinked past the swirling crimson haze, trying to make sense of the depraved tableau unfolding before them. They appeared to be standing in a circular grotto, the walls adorned with abstract holograms of twining, undulating forms. A raised dais dominated the center, its surface shifting and rippling in a mesmerizing, almost liquid dance. And arrayed around it in a ritualistic circle were perhaps a dozen females, their lush bioluminescent curves undulating in a hypnotic cadence of primal seduction. Kraxus swallowed hard, feeling his newly amplified instincts straining against the last tattered shreds of his self-control. "Behold the celestial harem, initiate!" Alora's sultry voice seemed to caress him from every angle. "The ultimate forge for pleasure warriors of your considerable talents." The high priestess materialized from the crimson miasma, gliding towards them with that same unsettling, boneless fluidity. Kraxus watched her approach with a mixture of dread and dark longing, his instincts howling for release. "You have awakened your primal desires and augmented your physical capacities," Alora purred, drifting sinuous tendrils, caressing his cheek. "Now it is time to truly shed your psychological shackles and surrender yourself to the profane ecstasies that await." One undulating tendril drifted down to caress the raised dais, which rippled and contorted in a disturbingly organic manner. Kraxus's eyes widened as vaguely anthropoid forms began to resolve themselves from the dais's malleable surface, their limbs elongating into grasping appendages tipped with prehensile protrusions. "This consecrated altar will be the crucible of your ultimate rebirth," Alora breathed, her crimson eyes smoldering. "Its sacred fluids will infuse your psyche and unleash your primal stud persona to rut without cease or shame." Kraxus felt his breath sawing in his chest as the sinuous, undulating forms continued to manifest around the dais, their beckoning appendages seeming to stroke and caress the air in a hypnotic dance of perverse seduction. This was it, the final, irreversible plunge into utter depravity, to surrender himself to these profane rituals, to be remade into a mere vessel for sating the hungriest lusts. It beggared comprehension. Yet hadn't he already crossed that Rubicon by imbibing Alora's alchemical augmentations? His body and instincts had been reshaped into those of a preternatural pleasure warrior. Better to fully embrace that role, no matter how depraved or soul-scarring, and ascend to the pinnacle of delirium the wingman ritual promised. Drawing a shuddering breath, Kraxus turned to face the Terran. The male's expression was unreadable, but he offered a solemn nod of acceptance. Then, without a further word, Kraxus strode forward and surrendered himself to the undulating forms awaiting on the consecrated altar. Kraxus drifted in a hazy, languorous delirium, his entire being suffused with profane raptures beyond comprehension. Vague memories flickered through the blissful miasma of surrendering himself to the consecrated altar's undulating caresses, allowing its pulsating fluids to infuse his psyche and unleash his primal stud persona. Of reveling in an endless frenzy of wanton indulgence, rutting with the celestial harem's beauties again and again without respite. Plumbing depraved ecstasies that shredded the last tattered remnants of his self-control and psychological shackles. How long had this bacchanalia raged? Hours? Days? He had no concept of linear time in this crimson-tinged realm of pure, primal ID. At last, Kraxus became vaguely aware of the Terran's voice piercing the lascivious miasma shrouding his consciousness. The words were indistinct, but seemed to be calling him back from the brink of absolute dissolution. With a monumental effort, the grizzled mercenary dragged himself towards coherence once more. He found himself sprawled amid the sumptuous disarray of sated bodies, the celestial harem's beauties arrayed around him in a satiated stupor. The Terran stood nearby, regarding Kraxus with an expression of deep satisfaction. As the mercenary's vision struggled to resolve, he became aware of Haziah nestled against the male's side, gazing at Kraxus with naked adoration. "I see the altar's consecration was thoroughly effective," the Terran murmured, a roguish smile playing across his features. "You've truly shed your final shackles and embraced your role as a pleasure warrior without limits." Kraxus groaned, suddenly aware of the bone-deep ache suffusing his entire being. His carapace was scored with a frenetic lacework of scoring marks, each one a mute testament to the profane bacchanalia he'd indulged. Yet rather than shame, he felt only a sense of euphoric accomplishment, as though he'd finally shed the last withering husk of denial to embrace his true, primal self. "I have transcended," he rasped, struggling to reassemble his thoughts through the clinging tendrils of blissful delirium. The Terran's grin widened fractionally. "Indeed you have, my friend. You've mastered the deepest, most depraved mysteries of the wingman ritual and been reborn as a true pleasure warrior." He cocked his head meaningfully towards Hazia. The sultry alien female regarded Kraxus with naked yearning, her movements almost feline with anticipation. "And now you face your ultimate test, to beguile and sate a female through the sublime arts you've unlocked, without relying on alchemical augmentation or profane rituals." Kraxus eyed the smoldering beauty, feeling his newly awakened instincts stirring in a snarling frenzy of dark longing. Just hours ago, the mere notion of willingly approaching such a lethal seductress would have paralyzed him with dread. Now, in the wake of the transcendent depravities he'd indulged, that fear had been burned away utterly. His psyche and instincts had been remade into those of an undying pleasure warrior, one who could rut and sate without limit or shame. Hazia made a soft, keening sound, her eyes smoldering with naked invitation as she regarded him. Kraxus felt his sheath beginning to unfurl in response, his newly augmented stamina thrumming with preternatural vigor. The time for hesitation was past. He was the master of his own profane destiny now, beholden to nothing but his primal desires. Rising with slow, purposeful movements, Kraxus turned to fully face the smoldering temptress. He was dimly aware of the Terran and Allura watching from the shadows beyond, their expressions inscrutable. No matter, his focus had narrowed to this singular, scorching point of longing, this final, ultimate affirmation of his rebirth as a true pleasure warrior. Hazia held his gaze, her own eyes darkening with naked yearning. A soft trill of anticipation escaped her as Kraxus stalked towards her with the slow, coiled menace of an apex predator. Then, drawing upon the deepest profane mysteries he'd mastered, Kraxus unfurled the tattered remnants of his floral bouquet and scattered the shriveled petals around them in a ritualistic circle. Hazia's eyes widened fractionally, her breath catching in her throat as the musky, earthy fragrance washed over them in an almost physical caress. Kraxus felt his sheath pulsing in response, his instincts screaming for release. With a low rumbling trill, he produced the last remaining shard of the Terran's chocolate and cradled it almost reverently in his palms. Hazia's nostrils flared, her eyes darkening further as the rich, musky aroma washed over her in intoxicating waves. A tremor ran through her body as Kraxus raised the confection to his mandibles in a ritualistic manner. He allowed his tongue to lave over the glossy surface in one slow, sensual stroke, savoring the exquisite flavor that blossomed across his senses. Hazia swayed toward him, her movements almost trance-like as that rich, musky essence enveloped them both. Kraxus felt his instincts blazing in a snarling frenzy, his newly augmented stamina thrumming with preternatural vigor. With a low rumbling trill, he extended the shard towards Hazia in a ritual offering. The female froze, her eyes locked on the confection, every muscle in her body taut with yearning. Then, with a soft whimper of surrender, she leaned forward and allowed her delicate tongue to brush against the chocolate's glossy surface. A full-body shudder rippled through her as the exquisite flavor blossomed across her senses. Kraxus watched in primal satisfaction as her eyes darkened further, her instincts blazing into snarling wakefulness. Hazia swayed closer until their bodies were almost touching, the rich musk of desire hanging like a palpable miasma around them. Kraxus felt his sheath pulsing in response, his breath sawing in his chest with the effort of restraint. Then the female leaned in and allowed her tongue to brush against his mandibles in a feather-light caress, chasing the lingering traces of that ambrosial flavor. A low rumble escaped Kraxus at the exquisite contact, his instincts howling for release. Hazia responded with a soft trill of invitation, tilting her head back to expose the sleek, elegant curve of her neck in a ritual of utter submission. Kraxus drank in the sight, feeling his control fraying by the second. With a low, rumbling growl of pure masculine possession, he seized her and bore her back against the luxurious disarray of sated bodies surrounding them. Hazia arched against him in wanton surrender, her eyes darkened to pools of molten yearning. Then Kraxus truly shed the last lingering shreds of denial as he claimed her in a frenzied rut of primal, undying ecstasy. Some unmeasured span later, awareness began trickling back through the clinging lassitude fogging Kraxus's consciousness. He became aware of the Terran standing nearby, an expression of deep satisfaction etched on his features. Haziah lay cradled against the grizzled mercenary's side, her eyes closed in a mask of utterly satiated rapture. A small, secret smile played across her lips as she nuzzled closer with a soft trill of contentment. "Well fought, my friend," the Terran murmured, his voice warm with approval. "You've mastered the deepest profane mysteries of the wingman ritual and transcended the shackles that bound you." Kraxus rumbled deep in his chest, feeling a sense of euphoric accomplishment unlike anything he'd ever known. He was remade, reborn into a pleasure warrior without limits or shame. "So, this is the true power you promised?" he rasped, cradling Haziah protectively. "To beguile and sate without relying on alchemical augmentation or profane rituals?" "Indeed." The Terran's smile stretched wider as he regarded the pair with undisguised satisfaction. "You've unlocked the ability to subjugate even the most lethal of females through the sublime arts of seduction alone. To rut and indulge without fear or consequence." He cocked his head meaningfully towards the celestial harem's other beauties, who were beginning to stir from their satiated stupor with soft murmurs of renewed longing. "They're yours for the taking as well, if you wish. Mere playthings to sate your newly awakened appetites, again and again without respite." Kraxus eyed the undulating, lush forms arrayed around them, feeling his sheath beginning to unfurl in response. Part of him recoiled at the notion of indulging in such profane excess. Yet that primal inferno blazing through his psyche yearned to plumb the depraved ecstasies he'd unlocked, to revel without limits or shame. He was a pleasure warrior without equal now, one who could rut and sate with impunity. And with a low, rumbling growl of pure masculine possession, Kraxus surrendered himself to the profane raptures awaiting him. Some unmeasured span later, he became vaguely aware of the Terran's voice piercing the blissful miasma shrouding his senses once more. Kraxus dragged himself back towards coherence with a monumental effort. The male was regarding him with an expression of deep satisfaction, while Alora and Haziah looked on with naked adoration. The grizzled mercenary lay amid a sumptuous disarray of sated bodies, every inch of his carapace scored by the frenetic lovemaking. "You have mastered the deepest secrets," the Terran intoned, his voice taking on a ritualistic solemnity. "Transcended your psychological and physical shackles to be reborn as a true pleasure warrior without limits." He extended a hand towards Kraxus in a ceremonial gesture. "The path before you is yours to choose, my friend. Will you embrace your role as a stallion without shame, indulging your newly awakened appetites in an endless bacchanalia of profane delights?" Kraxus eyed the proffered hand for a long moment, feeling the weight of that decision pressing down on him. To surrender himself utterly to his primal desires, rutting and sating without pause or consequence. Yet hadn't he already crossed that Rubicon by reveling in the depraved rituals here? His psyche and instincts had been remade into those of an undying pleasure warrior. Better to fully embrace that role, no matter how depraved, and ascend to the pinnacle of rapture the wingman path promised. Drawing a shuddering breath, Kraxus grasped the Terran's hand in a ceremonial clasp of acceptance. The male's grin was blinding as they sealed the pact. "Then go forth, my friend," he murmured, releasing Kraxus's hand, "and revel in the profane ecstasies you've unlocked. Become a true pleasure warrior without shame or limits." Kraxus rumbled deep in his chest as Haziah and Alora pressed sinuously against him, their eyes darkened to pools of molten yearning. The other celestial harem beauties were stirring as well, soft murmurs of renewed longing drifting through the crimson-tinged air. The grizzled mercenary eyed their undulating forms, feeling his sheath pulsing in response as that primal inferno blazed through his psyche. He was remade, reborn into a pleasure warrior who could rut and sate without pause or shame, and with a low rumbling growl of pure masculine possession, Kraxus surrendered himself to the profane raptures beckoning all around him. For he was the master of his own depraved destiny now, beholden to nothing but the insatiable cravings of his newly awakened appetites and the path of sublime delirium the wingman ritual had unlocked.